Hello, I would like to welcome you to today's TechNet webcast, the 24 Hours of Exchange Server 2007. This is part one of our 24-part series. For more Microsoft webcasts, go to microsoft.com/webcast. I would now like to introduce today's presenter, Harold Wong. Harold Wong is a Senior Technology Specialist with the Microsoft TechNet presenter team. He spent his first 5 years with Microsoft as a Field Systems Engineer, concentrating on Windows, Microsoft Exchange Server, and Microsoft Office Live Communications Server. Harold studied hard to snag an impressive array of certifications, including MCSE, MCT, and Certified Novell Instructor. He loves talking to customers about technology, especially technology related to deployment and technology that can have a positive business impact. Harold, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and welcome everyone once again to part one of a very long webcast series of Exchange 2007 pieces and parts and so on and so forth. And in addition to the 24 parts here, I do also want to point out that there will be 8 guided labcasts or hands-on labs where I will actually be guiding you through, and will be online to help with those as well. So please do register for those, and it will not just be Wednesday, Fridays. You'll notice that some weeks there will be a Monday session, but they all start at the same time, which is 11:30 a.m. Pacific, or if you're like me living in Phoenix, it'll be 12:30 Mountain. So let's go ahead and get started. I did notice that I totally forgot to put in my contact information, so let's put in my email address, harold.wong@microsoft.com. Also my blog address, which is blogs.technet.com/HaroldWong. So if you need to get a hold of me, feel free to send me an email. I have no problem answering questions and the like, so send them my way. Question, or the thing I just ask, is that you please not try to get me to do consulting work for you, because that's outside of my purview and I'm not allowed to do that for you. But I'll do my best to answer all your technical questions, and I'll even do my best to answer licensing questions. So let's go ahead and jump in. We only have an hour. So what are we going to be covering today? Well, since there's 24 parts, this first one is more of an introduction in terms of what are the requirements for Exchange 2007, as well as how does it integrate and what are some of the architectural topologies and introductory pieces in terms of server roles and admin roles for Exchange 2007. I'm going to go ahead and show you the helpful experience. It's always good if you have some experience with our technologies, but it's not required. In terms of the level for this session, it's going to be between 100 and 200 level, depending on the beginning piece, and then as I start talking about some of the roles. But it's not going to get real 300-400 level in depth. If you have those types of questions, feel free to send them my way, and I will do my best to answer them. I also want to say thank you to my teammate, John Weston, who is online answering and fielding all your questions in the Q&A panel. I believe Chris Avis said he would join and help out as well, so we will do our best to answer your questions for you. If at the end of the session today there are still questions in the queue, I will go ahead and take time to answer all of those before I actually close off for the day. But I will do it in the panel so that I can capture all the questions and all the answers. I won't actually answer anything online via voice, otherwise I won't capture that. And then I plan on posting the Q&A log to my blog, so that everybody who attends will actually get to see all the questions in case you don't see them all, and see all the answers that go with them. I will clean them up so that they will look nice and neat, but wanted to let you know that I plan to do that. So let's jump into the agenda. We are going to start the morning, or start the first piece here, with integrating with Active Directory. So we're going to look at some of the pieces around our AD topologies. So I'm going to do a quick review of AD topology, and then things that we need to look at from an Exchange perspective. So if we look at the architectural goals for Exchange itself, they tie around 4 areas. So let me build that out. It's around simplicity, right? We wanted to make sure that the deployment was simple, the integration was simple, and all the just configuration pieces of Exchange was as simple as possible, so that you didn't have to implement all these complex connectors and components and whatnot. So hopefully, as you start working with this in your lab, you'll find that that is indeed the case. right? No ADC, no SUS, no RUS, and so on and so forth, like you had from a 5.5 to 2003 migration or update or upgrade. And then around the flexibility, we wanted to make sure that customers who wanted specific roles on specific servers had that flexibility to implement that. So with Exchange 2007, you'll see that we now have individual roles, such as the hub transport role, or a client access server role, a mailbox server role, the edge transport role, also a unified messaging role, which is new to Exchange 2007. So you'll see that there are different roles with Exchange, which gives you flexibility to deploy just a mailbox role or just the hub transport role on a given server in a given area. Yet at the same time, you can still put your, the same roles on the same server. So if you wanted to do a single server deployment, you could still do that and have your hub transport, your client access, your mailbox role all sitting on the same server, just like you did today on Exchange 2003. In terms of trustworthiness, we wanted to make sure that the security piece was there so that you could actually secure your messages. The message hygiene feature set was built in. And then also customers who are looking for archival solutions or regulatory compliance, that we put that capability into the product so that you get it right out of the box. Now that may not meet everybody's regulatory compliance needs, but it's a great starting point, and for the majority of the customers out there, maybe this is all you need in the interim or to get by for now. And then as things get more complex, as more requirements come down, then you may need to look at third-party solutions, but at least we now have a great starting point that's built into Exchange so that you have that compliance capability. Also, if you've worked with Exchange 2003 and previous versions, as you started to or publish or expose certain types of client access capabilities to Exchange, the default was always a unsecured type deployment, right? So if you're going to do OWA, it was always HTTP by default, and then you had to go through certain things to make it secure. SMTP connections were always unsecure by default, and if you wanted to do anything, you always had to do something special to get the TLS type connection. Well, when you look at Exchange 2007, we started to move in the direction of let's make everything secure by default and make you have to do a little extra work to make it unsecure, right? So it's always good to start secure by default. So that way, if you wanted to expose OWA, it's automatically going to be SSL, so it's going to be port 443. In all the SMTP connections that, especially internal, will always have TLS encryption turned on. And if you're trying to communicate outbound, by default, an edge transport server will try to do secure communications, if at all possible. Right, so we've changed to make sure that we're secure by default as best as we can, and then you would actually have to go turn that off. From a scalability perspective, some of that has to do with the flexibility piece as well, which is around making sure that you have different server roles that you can put on different servers and scale out in that fashion. Also, building on top of 64-bit architecture and 64-bit hardware allows you to also scale a single server and be able to handle either more mailbox.
Go ahead, Harold.
Sorry about that, folks, and I do apologize. Seems to be having some technical difficulties here. I know that I had some power flickers earlier today in Phoenix. There's a storm that just blew in this morning, so do apologize. I will try to not talk so loud, but when you love the technology, you tend to talk or get real excited, so I apologize for that. But let's pick back up. Hopefully, I'm not sure where I left off or what was cut off, but when you look at the architecture goals, real quick, simplicity. Make it as simple as possible to deploy and to manage. Flexibility in terms of deploying different server roles, making sure that you have different roles that are available, and you get to choose what you deploy. Of course, there's a core set that needs to be deployed. Trustworthiness is around making sure that things are secure.
Harold, you're a little bit quiet now. Are you able to turn your volume up?
Yep. How's this? Any better? I can go ahead and I don't want to mess with my Pantonic.
You're good. You're good.
Okay. So now trustworthiness, making sure that communications are secure by default. So when you deploy OA, it's going to Okay, Harold. So thank you very much. Sorry about that. It seems I had another power surge at the house. Who would have thought, right? So back to the architectural goals slide. Scalability. 64-bit architecture ensures that we have room to grow from a memory perspective. Reduction in IOs per second. So the disk subsystem is not as important anymore in terms of making sure you have enough spindles and so on and so forth, because we're going to do a lot of operations in memory rather than disk, provided you give enough memory to the system. So if you're looking at an Exchange server like what we do, we've got about 24 gigs to 32 gigs on a lot of our production servers within Microsoft for the Exchange 2007 servers moving forward. But let's go ahead and move on to the 80 topologies. When you look at integrating Exchange 2007 into your forest topologies, we have a single forest, which is always going to be the easiest. So if you have a single forest, you have one Exchange org for that entire forest. Right? You don't have to worry about trusts or everybody that has a calendar is easy to be able to share their calendar and so on and so forth. Easiest, most simple type of implementation. If you look at the next topology, so let's see if we can get this to advance, you have cross-forest. So maybe you do have multiple forests in your environment, and if you do this, generally speaking, you'll have edge-to-edge transports that are there to do the cross-forest communications, right? Because maybe you've got two orgs or two companies, they've merged, or one company bought another company. So there are cross-forest topologies, and this is also supported. And as we move forward in time, looking ahead with Exchange 2007 native mode forest, then we also have better integration between these cross-forest type scenarios. And then the third common topology would be a resource forest, where maybe you have separation of administration, and there's one forest where all your AD objects sit, your user objects, but you create a resource forest where you actually deploy Exchange. And then in that case, the people who manage Exchange can manage all the servers and so on and so forth, but not have any administrative rights into the production or the main forest that has all the user objects and computer objects. And in this topology in 2007, we totally, fully, 100% support as well. So there are some features in 2007 where you can create linked mailboxes and so forth, so that you can actually create a mailbox in the resource forest that links to a security principal in a different forest, which was not something you were able to do prior to Exchange 2007. All right, so as you look at your topology from an AD perspective, just keep in mind, what is it that you have, and then as you look at deploying Exchange into it, know that there are three key topologies that we do support, right, which is around the single forest, the cross forest, and resource forest. Usually that's about everything that's out there, whether you have 20 forests, hopefully you don't, or 2 forests, or just 1 forest. Like I said, that's the easiest one to deploy. So let's move on and take a look at some quick review questions. And I do apologize that we're having so many difficulties. Just wanted to take a look here and let's have you vote, see if you're paying attention. Of these 4, which one does not fit from one of our architectural goals when we designed Exchange 2007? Give you to a count of 5, and then I will go ahead and show you everybody's votes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and it looks like most of you are answering this correctly, right? We did not have anything to do with complexity. It's the opposite. We wanted to make sure it was simple. So that is indeed the correct answer, which if this slide will advance for me correctly, you'll see complexity is the right answer.
We're saying it now. Yes.
Alrighty, so let's take a look at the next question. If you are looking at your AD topology and you want to separate out your Exchange server administration from that of AD, what's the most common AD topology or forest topology so that I can have that separation of administration? All right, and I did point this out as well. So let's go ahead and count to 5 again, and then I'll show the results. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, there you go. And it looks like 84 of you, or 70-some odd % of you, are getting it correct. It is indeed the resource forest, right? Because that's where I set up a totally separate forest where I maintain all the Exchange servers, and all the user and main computer objects sit in the main forest that I don't touch as an Exchange admin. And then the third question here, if you look at a cross-forest infrastructure, by default when you set that up, the main communication channel between these two forests will be which server role. And I know I went a little fast, but I did point this out, and it does look like most of you are getting it right. And I have well over 200 people on the webcast, yet I've got just over 100 people participating in the voting. So let's try to get more people interactively participating. So let me show the results. Looks like 70% of you are indeed getting it correct, and that is the Edge Transport Server role. And by the way, let me just point this out now, even though I know there's a slide later on where I talk about all the roles. Edge Transport Server role is not required in an Exchange deployment, right? It is optional but recommended. And I will point that out again as we get into the Exchange piece itself. So now let's go ahead and actually talk about some of the planning pieces as you start looking at your AD infrastructure. Once again, we're still looking at AD right now. And you say, all right, in Exchange 2003, I had these routing groups that I had to set up so that I can tell Exchange how to intelligently route between different low bandwidth sites. Yet in AD, you've already defined your AD site topology. Well, in Exchange 2007, we no longer have these routing groups. Now, there's still going to be a routing group that gets created as you install and as you integrate into your Exchange 2003 environment, because that's the backward compatibility piece. But essentially, everything sits in one admin group. Everything sits in one AD or one routing group in Exchange 2007 now, because we now have site awareness. So if you look here at this diagram, this is my Exchange server that is the hub transport server. It's going to understand site topology. So it's going to go ahead and look at my Exchange or my site topology and understand what needs to get routed and where it needs to get routed. Right? It looks at those links. So rather than me having to create a routing group infrastructure that pretty much mirrors my AD site topology, Exchange 2007 will look at the site topology. It will look and see, hey, where am I at? What site am I in? And just like your Exchange or your Outlook client today, when it comes up, or when your machine logs in, it looks to see what IP address you're on. It compares that to the site to find out what domain controller is in the nearest site to you. Exchange is going to function in that same similar fashion. So the communications will be a lot simpler. There's no configuration of routing groups and so forth. But this hub transport server will go ahead and look at the site information.
Music? Okay, folks. Sorry, it looks like Harold will be dialing back in just a moment here. I'm going to put us into music one more time. One moment. Harold, we'll go ahead and continue. Go ahead.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Sorry about all these challenges. Now I am indeed in with my cell phone. But if you look at this slide and you look at the AD site infrastructure, the key thing here is the hub transport role will indeed look up in AD to find out what subnet it's in and route mail appropriately. So it's going to pass information from site to site based on where Exchange servers are located. And if I go to the next site or the next slide here, when you define your IP site links within the AD environment, you define cost to those links. And Exchange will look at that where appropriate. So the key here is if there are multiple paths between these two servers, so here I've got one server and here I've got the other server, if there's two paths, it will try to take the lowest cost link if at all possible. But the thing to keep in mind here is that the hub transport won't always look at the cost of the link per se. It's going to try to deliver directly from one hub transport to another hub transport in a different site. So even though you notice there's a site here and a site here, it's not going to always relay through those sites. It's going to try to do a direct-to-direct communication. It's just that it's probably going to go ahead and take the path. If I look at the path it will take in terms of physical network path, It's probably going to come down here, through here to get to this particular server. But it will always attempt a direct hub-to-hub relay. It does not always have to pass it along the route from every hub to another hub to another hub to another hub to get to the final destination. And let me just use my little thing here again. Let's say I have a hub transport server here and a hub transport server here. And of course, in each one of those, that would mean I would have a mailbox role. Otherwise, there's no need for the hub transport if there's no mailbox role. But if I had email that needs to flow from this site to this lower right-hand site, the key is these two servers will try to communicate directly. It's not that it's going to hand off email from this particular site to this site to this site to this site over to this site. That's way too many hops. The hub transports will communicate directly, but it will understand that site topology and try to take the path with the lowest cost is the thing I'm trying to get across here. And when you look at AD, we know that AD has a set of databases that it stores information. And Exchange, of course, will absolutely utilize that AD database architecture, hence why AD is required. And when you look at your AD infrastructure, you know, hopefully, that, come on, let's build out, that there are different partitions, right? There's the schema partition, there's the configuration partition, and there's the domain partition. And when you look at the data that's actually stored in each of those partitions, and you look at the schema partition, well, that's where all the schema attributes are defined. That's where information that defines the class of the object and the attributes associated with the object. The fact that a user object has all these additional attributes related to Exchange, that's stored in the schema partition. When you extend the schema, that's the partition database that gets updated. In terms of configuration partition, that's going to contain information as it relates to Exchange configuration, such as address lists or global settings, email address policies as you define those, some of the transport settings, well, actually all the transport settings, they're going to be stored in AD in that configuration partition. So Exchange server related settings go in the configuration partition. The domain partition, well, that's pretty much all the data associated with, say, the recipient objects. Right? So as I define a user object and I put a mailbox on that user, or I create a mailbox for the user, that mailbox is homed on a particular mailbox server. Well, the fact that my mailbox is on server, DFX, Great Dane, or whatever that is, then that's going to be stored in the domain partition as it relates to my user object. Right? So there are three different databases when you look at the AD infrastructure: schema, configuration, and domain. And I just wanted to make sure that you know that Exchange will actually store information in each of these different databases, depending on the information you're looking at. Now, let's see if I can get this thing to advance. Come on now, you can do it. And I'm also dialed in or connected in via my Verizon EVDO connection because my power keeps surging. At least I'm running on a laptop, so at least my laptop is guaranteed to have power for at least another hour and a half to 2 hours. So let's take a look at the different Exchange server roles. And when you look at the way Exchange communicates with AD, it is taking advantage of an Active Directory API communication path. So it will communicate directly with AD, whether it be also LDAP lookups or map ERPC type connectivity pieces. So let's take a look at this first role, the Hub Transport Server role. I've talked about this briefly already. And when you look at the Hub Transport, it is responsible for all email flow within my Exchange organization. So every message that comes into the Exchange environment will be touched by a Hub Transport Server role. It will move messages from one server to another, from my outbox to your inbox, even if we're sitting on the same database, on the same server, in the same storage group. Right? Regardless of where my mailbox sits and your mailbox sits, when I send an email to you, Hub transport is responsible for that for that message being moved. One of the nice things there, we've also written policy engine and kind of tied it into the hub transport. So as an email moves, the hub transport can analyze and inspect that message. So if you have any kind of a rule that says emails with Social Security type numbers in there are not allowed to flow outside of my organization, I can create that rule for the hub transport, and it will inspect and then enforce that policy. Right, going back to that compliancy piece. As I have journaling rules that I want to turn on, it's the hub transport role that's going to be responsible for journaling all those emails for me. Right, so that's the first role. If I look at the next server role, there's a client access server role. This is about as close of a role as we can get that compares to the Exchange front end when you look at 2003 and 2000. But the client access server role is responsible for all client connectivity pieces as it relates to communicating with Exchange for POP3, IMAP4, Exchange ActiveSync, Outlook Web Access. Right, so those are the key things for coming into an Exchange environment outside of just pure mapping. Right, so client access server role will handle all of those client connectivity protocols, including Outlook Anywhere, which is the tunneling of RPC over HTTPS, which is essentially OA. Right, so the OA is a HTTP protocol, port 80, port 443, and that's also managed by client access server role. A new piece to Exchange 2007 is the addition of web services, and the web services also are sitting on this CAS server, which is your calendaring assistant and things like the auto discover for configuring your Outlook clients, Outlook 2007 clients to be more specific. As we look at the next one, new to Exchange 2007 is the Unified Messaging Server role, the UM role. The UM server is responsible for handling inbound voicemail calls, essentially, inbound fax, right? The new piece as it relates to unified communications, that interaction or the tie into voicemail so that I get voicemail as part of Exchange and it delivers into my inbox. If you want to fax something to me, then it comes into the UM server. It will hand off to the hub transport, which then delivers to my mailbox. Right? But this is a new role to Exchange 2007. And then if I look at the next role, the mailbox server role, that's the one that's responsible for handling all mailboxes. So my mailbox will sit on a mailbox server. My public folders, if I choose to implement those, will also be handled by a mailbox server role. Outlook clients that connect via mapping will connect directly to the mailbox server role just like it does today in Exchange 2003, as it did in 2000, as it did in 5.5 and 5.0 and 4.0. Right? So the mappy connections will still be handled directly by the mailbox server role. Now, all four of these roles that I've listed so far can all sit on the same physical server. So these four roles can be installed on a single server if I so choose. Or they can be split up across four different servers, or some split on one, the other two on another. Either way, all on a single or split up on different servers. The last one, which is the Edge Transport Server role, is also new to 2007, and this must sit on its own server. It is also not a server that's a member of your production domain. It is a server that will not be a part of your Exchange org. This sits in the DMZ, the only role that we've approved for sitting outside the corporate environment. So for your DMZ environment, this is where the Edge Transport sits. The Edge Transport does not handle client-type communications. It is purely SMTP. So this is our smart relay host, right, that sits in the DMZ. This is what you would use for outbound email to the Internet and inbound email from the Internet. The message hygiene pieces are all built into here. So the IMF for anti-spam, the hooks for antivirus, Right? All of that is tied to this edge transport server role. There is communication between the edge transport and the hub transport. So as emails hit the hub or the edge transport on the external side coming in, it will then pass the emails to the hub transport on the internal side to be distributed to the appropriate mailbox. And that is port 25 type communication. If you set up the edge sync communication, that's a different port. I don't have that port number off the top of my head. But there can be certain types of data that is pushed one way from the hub transport to the edge transport server. The edge transport will then store that in a Atom installation that is on that local server. And it is a one-way communication from hub to edge. Things like recipient information so that I can key in and filter on recipients. The safe senders list that my Outlook users might be using can also be synced out to the edge transport so that as the IMF is scanning for spam, it can also look at individual users' safe senders to make sure that before the server totally blocks that message, it can actually get into individual inboxes if individual users have deemed that message to be secure or to be safe. So those are the different roles for Exchange Server 2007. Remember, the first 4 can be installed on the same box. The last one, the edge transport, cannot be installed on any other box but itself. It's a standalone thing. It's not joined to your domain. It's not part of your Exchange org. It's a smart relay, SMTP relay from Microsoft with value add. So let's go ahead and take a quick look, demonstration 1 of 2. And it's not really an Exchange demo per se, but it's just taking a look at my AD environment just so that I can show you what I have running and make sure that everything is indeed in place. So let's go ahead and go to my share. Please let me know if you do not see a virtual PC that has C-DC-01 right up there on the desktop.
I'm seeing it right now, just so you know, Harold. So go ahead.
Perfect. So this is my domain controller. And if I look at my AD users and computers, I can see that I've got some computers here. My Exchange 01, that's my Exchange server. And I've also got a couple of workstations. If I look at my different OUs, you'll see that I've got some users created, whether it be operations or marketing or research and so on and so forth. And if I key in over here and look, I've also got a distribution group that's a dynamic distribution group. And one thing you'll see, I do have Exchange installed already here, and this is a distribution group that does exist. Yet from ADUC, if I look at it, all I can see is some basic property, right, which just says description in general. I no longer manage my Exchange recipient components from within ADUC. So that is new to 2007. Also, let me go ahead and show my advanced features, although that's probably part of my next demo. I'll jump back to that later. Let me also show you my AD sites and services. In my specific configuration, I only have one server and I only have one site, which is the default first site name. But it's even more imperative now from an Exchange communication perspective that you have your AD sites set up correctly. So make sure you come in and define all your subnets. Make sure you come in and define your IP connection, your site links between the different AD sites, and that you put the cost associated with them and get all of those pieces configured correctly. Right. Also, you'll see here in my domains and trusts, I only have one domain. So I am indeed a single forced, single domain deployment in my demo environment. And if I come down over here, let's bring up a nice little tool called, come over here, make it easier to see. I put down my phone, so I apologize if it's a little echoey or whatnot as I type since it's sitting on my keyboard. But I'm going to bring up a tool called NTDS-util. And let's go take a look at my domain configuration. So let's get into domain management here. And for my domain management, let's go ahead and look at my connections. And let's connect to server CCC01, which is my domain controller. And that's the only one I'm going to connect to. And let's go ahead and list the directory partition names. And you can see that I've got my configuration partition for Contoso. I've got my schema configuration for Contoso, my forest for Contoso. So if you have, multiple domains and so on, you will see all of that information in here. I just wanted to show you that you can actually go and look and see what particular domain partitions exist on a given server. And this is my single domain controller environment. So it has all the partitions on there. Just, real quick so that you can see that. I'm sure some of you are saying, oh, I didn't know you could do that, or some of you are saying, who cares, I don't care about that. But either way, I did want to show you that you could actually go in and see what AD partitions exist on a given domain controller. But that's just a quick review just to show you that I do have a single domain. It's a single domain controller environment, and all the partitions happen to sit on this particular server. I will come back to the second demo here in a little bit and show you some more items that are specific to Exchange. So before we do that, let's take a quick review. I've got 3 more questions, and let's see if you were paying attention. So which domain database is used by Exchange Server 2007 to store attribute information, configuration, and recipient information? Right, so items specific to Exchange Server, like transport rules, as well as to recipient information, like where my mailbox server is located. Give you another second or two, and let's go ahead and show you the results. It looks like we're almost dead even with configuration partition and all of the above. And, unfortunately, we just spiked in the wrong direction. So let me show you the answer. It is indeed all of the above. So remember, the schema partition holds all the attributes that exist as it relates in the class objects. Configuration partition is going to maintain all the specific configuration for Exchange Server. And then the domain partition is where the recipient information is stored. So in this case, it is all of the above. Let's take a look at the next question. Good thing we're doing a review here. When you look at Exchange Server 2007 and its delivery of messages, how is it going to determine the best route? And so far, so good. I've only got under 100 people responding, so come on, everybody, participate. Click one of the answers. And I'll go ahead and show the answer now that we're above 100 participating. It looks like the majority of you are indeed getting it correct. The answer is by the cost of an IP site link. So remember what I said. Exchange 2007 with the Hub Transport Server role is site aware, and it will look at the site topology. So it's going to query AD to get that site topology, right, so that it can actually send the email to the appropriate site in terms of finding the other Hub Transport Server. And then the last question for this section is, which server role will try to send directly to another server role of the same kind, and not necessarily look at cost, though, initially, but will look at trying to make that connection? I know my question sounded a little confusing, but it looks like most of you are getting it correct. So let's show you the results and see that 69% of you did select Hub Transport, and that is correct. Remember, Hub Transport will try to do a direct Hub Transport to Hub Transport communication, but it does look at cost link when it's looking for these multiple hops. It's just that it doesn't always send through each hop. So it doesn't have to relay messages to every Hub Transport in every one of those sites. It will go hub to hub directly from one site to the next, but it will follow the path of the lowest cost link. So let's now jump into the third section. And I apologize if it seems like I'm going a little fast. I just know that I had some challenges. We want to make sure I get through this content and give you the information that is important here. So let's take a look at Exchange Server permissions and finish off this first part. All right, when you look at administrative changes, we have made some changes, as I mentioned earlier.
In Exchange 2003 and 2000, we had admin groups. So as you did Exchange servers, I would put them into the appropriate admin groups for how I administer. And if you came from an Exchange 5.5 environment, that was the site, Exchange 5.5 site. Right? In Exchange 2007, we no longer really use these admin groups. We will have one there, but every service is in the same admin group. Right? It was not very flexible. It was very difficult to manage that, and I might have admins that might be responsible for administering different servers in different admin groups, and that made it also painful. We found, due to that insufficient flexibility, that most organizations eventually went with a single admin group solution or deployment anyways, because it was so big of a pain in the butt to deploy all these different admin groups. So it wasn't really used. Well, in Exchange 2007 now, rather than using admin groups, we now have delegation of administration. So you can get more granular in the way you delegate administration. So if I delegate administration so that you can administer servers, well, then you can administer servers. If you can administer recipients, well, then you can administer recipients. And with the command shell, you can get very granular in terms of who can administer exactly which servers as you do this delegation. So if I go to the next slide here and I kind of do a quick comparison of Exchange 2003 to 2007, this thing to build. The administration of Exchange 2003 was kind of split up into two different areas, right? Recipients, you actually went in and did some ACLing of schema attributes for who could administer what from a recipient management perspective, but then your Exchange server roles still wasn't very clear, and there was still ACLing that took place. When I go to Exchange Server 2007, at installation there are certain ACLs set up, and you don't have to go back in and touch those anymore. And then you just delegate who gets to administer what aspect of Exchange thereafter. So it is more granular, admittedly from the GUI perspective. It gives you certain delegation capabilities, and then for the very complex delegation scenarios, you would have to use the command shell to implement that. But either way, more flexibility and that security and permissions perspective in 07 is much better. And that's all this particular thing is showing, is that I can have that split permission model. Even if I have a single domain environment or a single forest environment, I can delegate administration for the actual servers to a group of administrators and delegate administration of recipient objects to a different group of users. So if I do a quick look at the different administrator roles in Exchange 2007, there's the organization administrators. Right, so those are the folks that can administer organization-wide settings, such as transport rules. The recipient administrators are the ones that will administer recipient information, things associated with the user's mailbox, the distribution groups, and so forth. Exchange server administrators can administer things associated with an individual server, such as the mailbox database, right? Those specific settings on a server-by-server basis. And then the Exchange view-only admins are those that can view the data, but it's a read-only type perspective, so they can't actually go in and make any configuration changes. And if you look at the type of data that's available to manage, I've already talked about that, right? Global data versus recipient data versus specific server data. And as you look at each of these different roles, they can do different things, as I've already mentioned. Right? So as I delegate administration, I need to understand what it is I want that particular user to administer, and then I delegate them into the appropriate breakout here based on org, recipient admin, or server admin. And I do want to point out something that is important, which is in the recipient admin piece. You do need to do a setup/prepare domain if you want to actually delegate administration to different domains for that recipient admin permission role. All right, so make sure that for domains that don't have Exchange servers, but will host recipients that you do a prepare domain so that the appropriate permissions are set for Exchange recipient administrators. And then the last demo I'm going to get into here is just taking a look at some of these admin roles and taking a look at some of the permissions that are set and how it looks in AD. So let's go ahead and go back to my sharing slide here. Hopefully everybody does indeed see my CDC01. Let me jump back over to my AD users and computers. And by the way, without the advanced features turned on, you'll see that I don't necessarily see everything in here, but I'm going to show advanced features so I can see some of my specific Exchange system objects. So let's go look at my Exchange security groups. These are created when Exchange is installed. Don't go around and mess with these, please, or you'll mess up the way Exchange works. But you can see there are organization administrators, recipient, server, view only, and then this 2003 interop for integrating back in with an Exchange 03 environment or even 2000 environment. So if I look at Exchange organization administrators, it is a universal security group. If I look at the members, I can see that administrator by default is in there. Right? That's who I use to install this with. If I look at the other groups that this is a member of, it is a member of Exchange recipient administrators as well. Right? So we're using the group model and then assigning permissions. So we're ACLing the different areas of AD and the different areas of the server components based on these groups. And then we're just putting one group within the other group rather than ACLing everything with individual group permissions. If I look at recipient administrators, once again, the Exchange org admins is a member of this, and that's the only one by default. And this is a member of the Exchange view only admin. And so group within a group. Now, if I wanted to let somebody have the recipient administrator type capabilities, I can go ahead and just add them in here, or within the Exchange tool, I have the delegation wizard. That is a better way to do it, and you have the ability to use a wizard-based piece to do the delegation. So if I were to look at each one of these, the key here is you can see that there are different items that are a member of these different groups, and these groups have just been granted access to different areas within the AD infrastructure and within the Exchange infrastructure. If I look at my Exchange system objects, you'll see that there are different objects here as it relates to Exchange, those who can install domain servers, the piece, and then my system mailbox sits over here as well. If I go to, let me bring up my Exchange server. So I happen to have an Exchange server over here. If I bring up my Exchange Management Console, let me just quickly show you where I would go to do the delegation of administration. Guess I should have started this console earlier. Apologize for that. Over here, I've got the organization configuration. MMC30, by the way. And you can see that there's organization-wide configuration settings, server configuration settings, and then recipient configuration settings. And in this organization configuration is where I can choose to do the delegation. So if I want to add a delegate, I would go ahead and bring up the Add Delegate wizard, and then I can choose to select a group or a user. So maybe I want to give a tour the Exchange admin role. So let's just go ahead and step through this. Very basic, very simple, very easy. You can see the command shell command that was executed. Let's go ahead and finish here. I'm going to jump back over to my domain controller. Go back and look at my groups, and let's see what happened. Well, a tour was added into the Exchange Organization Administrator Security Group, right? So very basic, but the delegation wizard is an easy way to say, well, I want these people to do this without having to come in and modify group membership here directly. And if you do it that way, then it's viewable within the Exchange Management Console as well. Makes it a lot easier, one-stop shop for administering your Exchange type security settings and permissions. So with that, let's go ahead and jump back out of this demo, come back into my slide deck, and finish up this particular part one with some review questions. So just like the other sections, I had 3 questions. I have 3 more questions for you. So how many predefined admin groups are provided with Exchange Server 2007? Give you a few more seconds here. I would like to get over 100 people participating. And it looks like we are there now. So let's go ahead and show you the results. And it does look like over 60% of you are indeed answering it correctly. There are 4 groups. All right? Come on, advance. For crying out loud. There you go. There are 4 groups. There were the, let's jump back over. I want to show them to you again. So you see there's the Exchange Organization Administrators, Recipient Administrators, Server Administrators, and View-Only Administrators. Most people tend to forget about the View-Only Administrators. Don't worry about the 2003 interop piece. All right, so let's jump back over. So looks like the majority of you did get that answer correct. Let's go on to question number 2. And when you look at one of these 4 roles, which one is allowed to modify Exchange properties on the AD user? Right. Had to ask it this way so that we don't just give away the answer. So you're modifying user-specific settings as it relates to Exchange. I probably just gave that away as well, but let's go ahead and show you the results. And it looks like 67% of you are indeed getting it correct. Right? It is the Exchange Recipient Administrators, because that's the role that allows you to manage recipient objects, and that's the AD user piece. So let's look at one more question, and that is, which role does not provide organization-wide permissions to an Exchange admin? Does not do anything org-wide, but only on an individual. Well, if I say that word, I guess I'll give away the answer, but it's not organization-wide. And I have over 100% or 100 people participating, so let's show the answer. And it looks like 66% of you at this point in time are getting it correct. It is the server admin, right? Because that is a server-by-server type perspective. It's not total organization-wide permission. All righty. So let's go ahead and bring a close to this particular session. If I can bring up my session summary. We took a look at how AD plays into Exchange 2007. Right, so it is a review, but we now are very dependent upon the AD site configuration and the links that are defined, because the hub transport role is responsible for routing email and looking at the site topology rather than depending on a routing group configuration, which is redundant in most cases. We also looked at the different server roles that are new to Exchange 2007. Right, there are 5 of them. Maybe not all of them are new per se, but we've now broken them up into 5 different distinct roles that give you flexibility and scalability of deployment. And then we looked at the administrative roles and the permissions and the delegation, which is the last piece, that you can actually delegate who can administer what aspects, what pieces of your Exchange environment. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and thank you very much for joining. I also want to thank again John Weston, Chris Avis, and Brian Von Axelson on the back end for jumping in and helping out with the questions. And I do give you my sincere apologies for all the technical difficulties I had due to the power situation in my house today. So hopefully the next one won't be quite as bad and will flow smoother. All right, so with that, thank you everyone for joining, and Eric, back to you.
Okay, I just want to let them know I put up the survey here. In addition to being valuable feedback for us, as you saw, that it does also enter you into being entered into a drawing for a Zune portable media player, so a little incentive there to fill out the survey. I encourage you to fill it out. If the registered online option doesn't work for you, just go ahead and go back, and then you can use the all other registrants option. But it should be working now. We had an issue with it earlier. So once again, I do want to thank Harold Wong for sticking out and presenting today. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webcast. We hope to see you on part 2 and for all the rest of the 24 parts of this series. That does conclude today's TechNet webcast. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of this conference.